I gave a warm yes, but it's pretty cold. Well, I've been rubbing my hands together. But thank you so much for having me. I arrived yesterday. I'm a bit jet lagged. So if I forget my name through this spiel, just remind me what that is. But it's so good to see you and to be here in this wonderful country. I have a lot to share, but I've found myself receiving more gifts already just in being here in this revolutionary fugitive space. So I'm happy to be here, but I'd like us to do something just to get things started, a ritual to ground us and make me feel warmer, I think, from my long travels. Um, I'd like everyone to stand up on their feet. If you can, do that. Um, we're going to do some exercises. No, we're not. No, we're not going to do exercises. Um, where I come from, we have this strange ritual. It's a very ancient ritual. Um, so what I'm about to teach you should not leave this room, okay? Do I have your promise that this will not leave this room? It's a secret. It's fugitive technology, okay? It only stays here. If the government hears about it, we're all criminal then. This is criminal underground work already. Okay, so what I'm gonna invite us to do right now is find two or three, preferably three people, and hug them so tight that you leave the stain of your skin on theirs. Okay, can we do that? Go, go. Say welcome, or rather, declare yourself welcome. Alrighty then. Just three, not four. If it's four, then we have a metaphysical problem. It has to be three. All right. How many of you violated that ancient practice and went for four? Please, can you kindly leave the room? All right, everyone, get seated. Thank you so much. How did that feel? Good? Good? Um, Thank you, brother, for having me here, and sister, and this wonderful place that I've been touring since I arrived a couple of hours ago. Such a fascinating place. And in case I forget saying this, I like to say this in public, that I like to be tethered and attached to this work. I like to, um, I've been moved and touched by the story and the people here and the signs and symbols. And I kept on saying, something is calling me here. I didn't expect to come to Scotland and meet a spiritual aspect of myself here in Scotland. I expect that with Brazil or Nigeria or India, but not Scotland. So, so this has been surprising already. So, in whatever way that I can be, and I mean this, to be tied to this work, I would love to be tied to this work. I would love to be entangled with what you do, and keep coming back, but to be an intellectual, spiritual partner with what you're doing here. Is that a yes? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I mean that. Okay, now that I've gotten that out of the way, I want to say a few words about the things that I do. I consider myself many things, primarily a father to my children, a life partner to my dear wife, um, a stand up philosopher, um, right? Because humor matters in what I do. Recovering psychologist. I've been trained very well, and I'm doing a lot of recovering from all that training, all of that education. I have two PhDs. I'm recovering from all of that. And it feels, important to say that through all of that, my work is about, I think, mobilizing thought so that attention is given to the crack, what I think of as the crack. Or you might think of the crack as a strange kind of opening within closures. Let me say a few things about what I mean by that. There's a story about the transatlantic slave trade where I come from, by the Yoruba people from West Africa, about those ships, right? We have many stories about them, but one story in particular is about the trickster, a trickster figure. Now, my dear sister called me a trickster. I'm not a trickster. I don't think tricksters can be identities or persons. So I'm not a trickster. I move and I feel moved by the archetype of the trickster. And I think these times are being heavily operated on by the trickster, right? But we have a trickster in Yoruba mythology. His name is Eshu. Do you have a trickster in Scotland? Maybe a trickster figure or someone that is an agent of chaos? No?
There's a trickster in Celtic mythology.
I'm
Also
looking for.
the god of love.
Oh.
It's an Ingusog. That's more Irish Celtic mythology.
What's the name again?
Ingus Og.
Ingus Og. Okay. Okay. All right. What she said. So, yeah, tricksters. Tricksters are, they don't just bring chaos. Tricksters kind of put order in its place, reminding order that you're indebted to something larger than yourself, right? So this trickster called Eshu is his name. When the British missionaries came to Nigeria, they needed a fall guy. They needed a bad dude to translate the Bible into Yoruba. And so they took the name of Eshu and made Eshu the devil, right? So Eshu became the devil. There's a movement in Nigeria now called Eshu is not the devil, resisting the epithet, the label, the identity. I think Eshu doesn't mind, right? I think Eshu is too. Eshu is like, yeah, I mean, let's explore what this identity could do. Let's eat it up and see what happens, right? Tricksters are not very invested in identity because they spill beyond identity. Modernity is the carceration or the incarceration of identity. We're stuck in our boxes. We tick this box or that box, right? There's something about the trickster that spills beyond those boxes. But I digress. In this story, the ships came. And when the ships came, one of the gods in the Yoruba mythology, his name is Ogun. He's the god of metal, and he's the god of war, and he's the god of victory. So his CV is very loaded, if you will. And he mounted up this insurgency. He says, I will go down to the beach and we will chase these slavers away. And so imagine this warrior class of invisible spiritual entities rushing to the beaches to chase away the ships. On their way, they are intercepted by the trickster. He sneaks out from the corners of their eyes and he approaches his brother Ogun and says, how about we go in the morning when it's nice and warm instead of coming at night? I think it's a better strategy than doing this right now, okay? Let's do this in the morning. And then he drugs his brother. He gives him something called palm wine. This is known to Nigerians and many Africans. It's very, very alcoholic brew. And so he gives you a nod in your head like, you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. Ooh, high five from there. So, drugs his brother. The brother takes palm wine and Eshu proceeds to sneak aboard the ship, those ships, and he travels along with the slaves into the new world, right? He doesn't shut down the enterprise. Instead, he performs an act of radical accompaniment, right? He literally travels with them to the other side. I've always wondered why that was the case. Why not just declare victory? Why not just win? Because sometimes the act of winning comes with the cost of repetition, right? Sometimes the problem requires a solution, and that solution becomes the containment or the continuation of the problem. What I'm trying to say here is that sometimes the way we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis, right? And the logic of the problem masquerades as a solution, right? Maybe the trickster felt, well, if we win, we would have lost. Maybe the thing here is not to win. Maybe the thing here is to travel through the cracks. Maybe the thing here is to travel with them and to creolize the world from underneath the master's nose. And that's what he did. So my work is about seeking those strange openings, the minor gesture within large, imprisoning ideas. How do you find the seed of freedom within the kernel or the boat or the ship that seeks to take my body and your body away into plantations of labor and oppression? That's what my work is about. And I want to share a little bit about that, what I call a prior generosity, okay? I came to Scotland and I just want to confess here that we have lots of stereotypes about Scottish people, okay? Can I share a little bit about them? Is it okay? We there's we kind of see just like okay, so Canada is the more docile cousin of the United States. We think of Scotland, most of us in the global south, as the fiery, rude, and wildly beautiful cousin of the English people. Right. This is how we see. We see if you were to put a if you were to ask an AI system that's made by us, maybe Chat GPT or something, or it's like someone from India said Chat Gupta. If you were to input an image, an idea about Scottish people in a system made by us, hypothetically, it would produce a red-haired, wild person screaming freedom, right? And this is how these are the images that, and I have to say, I was telling some of my siblings a while ago that I grew up watching BBC, right? And this colonial television, we grew up watching a lot of series and television and BBC News and all of that. And in fact, some of the times our teachers would drag out a television screen in the middle of the classroom and say, this is how to speak English. So we had something called received pronunciation. And we were supposed to contort and bend our huge lips so that it matched the language and the pronunciation and cadence of the people we were watching on television. And if we didn't do as well, we would be beaten, right? So we were educated. I'm very educated. But to be educated is to be educated out of context, out of your immanence within locality and community, is to be prepared for a larger world where you matter. So locality doesn't matter. Ecology doesn't matter. This is education, right? So we learned about the Scots in this way, this demand for freedom. I read a bit about the independence wars, the you're being adopted into the Union, right? This is May 1, 1707, right? Am I correct? And a treaty before that. And all of so our education is about you. We did a lot of, we learned a lot about you in this way. But so I came here with a question that has been burning for me for some time as we consider notions of solidarity and freedom and agency and accountability and responsibility in these times of genocide and warfare and suffering. What do we do? What does it mean to be free? So I ask a question to you all. Are we free? Are we free? Are we free? I'm getting a lot of no. We're not free. I wonder where that's coming from or what you're hearing when I ask you that. For instance, you're wearing a beautiful red scarf. Did you choose to wear this? It was your choice, right? So, by that logic, aren't you free to make those choices, right? How many of you made choices to wear the very clothes you're wearing right now? Right. It seems easy then to say, I make choices every day. I like that muffin, that blueberry muffin, and not that muffin, so I choose this muffin, so I'm free. It seems easy to think about the world in terms of this kind of calculations. We make choices every day. We determine how we move. We determine which schools we send our children to. We are free. However, it seems inadequate to think about freedom this way. How many of you have watched The Devil Wears Prada? No one here? You've watched it? I'm Nigerian, so I don't care about spoiler alerts. I'm just going to tell you anyway, and you can stone me if you want to. But there's a scene where the character played by Anne Hathaway is, Anne Hathaway's character, I forget her character's name, but her character is very, very, she looks down upon the fashion industry in some way, like I'm above this. And then Meryl Streep, who is a devil incarnate in this, gives her a talking to and basically says, you think you're above this? The clothes you're wearing were actually determined by a committee many years ago, right? You didn't choose this, right? It was chosen for you. The illusion of modernity is that we're free and adulterated and pure and removed from the conditions of our production. And that is what white modernity does well. White modernity is, by whiteness, I don't mean white people. I like to take pains to say this over and over again. Whiteness is not to be reduced to white skin. Whiteness is a racializing socio-economic profiling of bodies in accordance to their proximity to power, individual power. White modernity is the proliferation of dissociated selves. What whiteness wants to do is to build on on separation, right? Right? It's scandal. The most scandalous thing to whiteness is not diversity. Right? You can have in fact, it will give you DEI. It will sprinkle diversity, equity, and inclusion. You need some of that? Oh, go ahead. I'm going to put that in. It doesn't care about diversity. It's not scandalized by diversity. It's not scandalized by the black body. It's scandalized, though, by non-separability. How our bodies travel in lowercase. How our bodies are much more than the identities that we assume and practice. Right? Whiteness is a practice. And this whiteness is dying now. But that's where I'm going to with this story. Right? This idea that we are free seems inadequate to the moment. And I'll tell you why. Has anyone read here the book by a short story by Ursula Le Guin called The Ones That Walk Away from Omelas? You have, sir? Good, you have. Great. You do. You do? You've read that story as well? You've read everything. We should all read Ursula Le Guin's Everything. Spoiler alert. In this story called The Ones That Walk Away from Omelas, something emerges in a city, a utopian arrangement. And this city is called Ormelas. Now, before we get in there, I'm going to ask you to imagine the most happy, the most prosperous, the most progressive state of things for Glasgow. What would Glasgow look like if you didn't have to be an activist? What would Glasgow look like if you didn't have to protest? If it were perfect? What would perfect Glasgow look like? I mean, I've seen signs, Glasgow smiles the most or something like that, or all those signs and stuff. Now, what if they were really real? What if I didn't have to squint my eyes when I saw those signs? Like, you know? What if we took them as 100% true? What would a perfect Glasgow feel look like? What would be the aesthetic? Can I get some responses? If you respond, my brother Luke would give you £10,000. There you go. Brother, there he is. Yeah.
Actually making use of the river and bringing life back to the central vein of the city because it feels dead so often on the inside.
So a perfect Glasgow will bring life, you say?
Well, actually, life from the river outwards.
From the river. Clyde?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. So that's one. Life bubbling from River Clyde. That's $20,000, brother. I'm sorry. Yeah. Public toilets. The responses I'm getting here are very earthy and grounded. I like that. I've done this exercise in too many cities to count. And people speak about joy and no more sexism and no more this. And here I'm getting public toilets. This is a different... All right, so public toilets. Okay, I love this. Anyone else? Yes. Oh my goodness, this is amazing. More bikes, no cars, less cars. Okay, very, very practical. Public transport, public toilets, River Clyde. Yes. More markets, fruits and vegetables. That's what a perfect. What would the police look like? There you go. I was waiting for that. You're too late. You're too late. No police, you say. No police. So no jails, no cells, no criminals, no laws. No flags. Did I hear no flags? Did you say no flags? No flags, no visas, no passports. Just banners. Okay. All right. Now imagine, would there be pain and suffering of any kind? We need that? We need that, right? We will always have that. So, okay. Okay. All right. Wonderful. Thank you. Now imagine that all of this existed in Glasgow. But then and Glasgow thrives as a wonderful city of culture, not just what UNESCO names it as, but it thrives as a beautiful place. And people want to come here and live here. There's no police, there's no politician, probably no TV, and Facebook goes out of, there's no chat GPT, and it's just fine. And there's wonderful relationships. Science blossoms. Spirituality blossoms. There's all kinds of knowledges. But somewhere beneath the city of Glasgow is a child. And this child is in a room below this one. Let's say it's below this one. And the child, I say it because in the book, Ursula Le Guin refuses to genderize the child because of the misery that the child undergoes. This child is suffering to the nth degree. The child is locked up in a cold and wet place, and once in a while a guard comes and kicks some food to the child, and the child sticks out its hand and says, "Let me out. I will be good. Just let me out." And this happens. The child is small, and just a while ago the child was with its mother, but no longer with its mother. Now imagine this happens, And that you would expect that in a morally superior city like Glasgow, no one knows about this child because everyone will be up in arms about saving this child. But it's the reverse, actually. Everyone knows. In fact, it's part of your education to know about this child's misery. Excursions are taken, and everyone is taken to this child's door, and they're made to see the child. But in the self same day, and this is the strange arrangement, in the same day you try to help the child, and this is the cost here. In the self same day you try to help the child, you give it a smiley face or you reach out to touch the child, 1 million children and families will die. And that's the riddle of the book of Omelas. Something happened, some cosmic entity made a bargain with the city. I will guarantee your happiness. You will be perfect as long as this child suffers. This one child. What would you do if you were in that situation? It's sci-fi, the story, but it's not quite sci-fi. It's not really sci-fi. It feels like every claim to freedom is subsidized by something. Like colonial freedoms, the luxury of individuation is subsidized by the dungeons in Ghana, by the slave ships that brought African bodies here. You know, Scotland played a huge role in the transatlantic slave trade. Not as huge as England. I was just telling my siblings on the way here that compared to England, England transported about 1.5 million bodies in the triangular trade. Scotland maybe 3,000. But the enthusiasm for building ships and wanting to participate in this huge economic opportunity was very high, even though the opportunities weren't always present. So freedom is subsidized by something lower, by suffering. So that to say we are free often obscures the ways that bodies are invisibilized and trampled upon and oppressed in order to make room for the stabilities we enjoy. I just came from a dungeon in Ghana, and to say that it was a miserable experience would be to underplay the kinds of tensions and grief that I encountered in those, I don't want to call them rooms, right? I don't want to give that the honor of being a room. Those windowless structures, there were dungeons, churches were built upon them, and bodies, thousands, were pressed in there, waiting to be transported on ships through a door of no return. And it was a very, very shocking experience for me. And I got to understand how the flatness of modernity, the surface of modernity, is subsidized by the misery beneath it, right? But I'm not here to make you feel guilty or anything like that. That's not my work. I don't do that well. I'm here to invite something else that is already happening here and invite an attention around this beautiful fugitive experiment that is already blossoming here, right? I'm here to tell you that that stability is dying. White stability is dying. It's in crisis right now, right? The surface that was the colonial invention and the enterprise of the slave ship is suffering huge cataclysmic events right now. They are anthropomorphic, they are geological, they are psycho-spiritual. They're all of these things. It's like we're suffering a mass disabling event. I call it white syncopation. Right? Syncopation, if you know jazz, you know what I'm talking about, syncopation, right? It's like within the rhythms, the dominant downstrokes of modernity and the tendencies of the neurotypical, something is tearing apart all the stabilities that we have taken as our notion of belonging and identity. In Ghana, there are cows now that have learned to ingest plastic because Well, we're now living in a toxic realm where our bodies are no longer free, to be themselves. Our bodies now have to commingle and co-evolve with plastic. I think on Mount Fiji, they found um, plastic in the clouds. On those beautiful ethereal structures, they found plastic, even in places that you would think are pure. Everywhere is toxic now. Are you feeling exhausted these days? Maybe you're feeling exhausted with the way things are, and you feel there ought to be something else, right? There is a sense of exhaustion. This isn't some new age today stuff. I'm talking about even stuff that might be empirically true and empirically verifiable. That we are feeling exhausted, we're feeling cut off, and there's a wave of grief that feels like it's syncopating our bodies. And maybe even grief that is not even, you know, tied to our own experiences. My wife, some time ago, said, just was feeling sad. And I did my shrinking psychotherapeutic thing and said, okay, let's draw a list of things, draw up a list of things that might have instigated this sadness. And we went through her day together and the past week and everything together, and we couldn't find anything. And then I made a suggestion that maybe it's not your grief then. Maybe you're sensing, maybe we're not as effectively closed as we think we are. The ways that we think about the individual and your own gilded interiority, your own self. The promise of modernity was that you were going to be all by yourself. With your own feelings, nobody is going to bother you. And then suddenly we're picking up, like some sensors, we're picking up the grief of whales or the grief of a dying plant. And we're picking up all these things and we're disturbed, we're unsettled. Modernity was supposed to be the paradigm of settlement. And then all of a sudden, we're all becoming unsettled. And that's disturbing. And so what do? We double down on our activisms. We protest, we hit the streets, we examine and enforce and amplify our solidarities. But what happens when even that becomes problematic? If you watch sci-fi movies like I do, you know that sometimes when it ends, there's always a twist of some kind where the hero successfully vanquishes the villain, but just before the credits are done, we find out that the vanquishing, the defeat was all part of the plan. And the villain wanted you to win just so it could pursue its interests. You know what I'm talking about? Alien. You know Alien, right? On the ship where the predator, am I getting too nerdy here? Is it okay? If I nerd out a bit, right? The predator is on the ship and they've won the war, and just before the credits come, something comes out of the belly, and it's like, there you go, part 2. There's always a sequel. But there's a story, there's a logic here, right? Even when we win, especially when we win, victory could become a costly repetition of the colonial project. We learned this the hard way in our African independence movements. We chased away the British. We chased away the colonial masters. We were like, get out. We've won. We're going to put up our own flag. And we chased them and they said, okay, bye. And they went. And then we turned around and we saw that we were all in suits and ties. We had become the very thing we chased away. And there was no other way to think about ourselves except through the prism of the very things that we had just chased away. If we win, or if we beat them at their game, a brother of mine would say, we have already lost, right? What happens when the way we respond to crisis becomes the crisis? What happens when even our notions of diversity and equity and inclusion becomes a resuscitation of a paradigm of pathology? Does anyone here know about Prometheus? Prometheus, the Greek Titan in the Titanomachy, is punished by Zeus, right? Let me nerd out a little bit. Punished by Zeus. He's tied to a mountain Who knows what the mountain was called? Mount Caucasus. Literally, white mountain, Caucasian mountain, right? He's tied there as a punishment because he gives fire to humanity, you see. And so he's tied to a mountain. And every morning, and this is macabre, every morning Zeus sends an eagle. What's the name of the eagle? Atos Caucasus, Caucasian eagle, right? The eagle comes and eats up the side of Prometheus, eats up his divine liver, if you will. And at night, what happens? It grows out again. And the same thing repeats itself every morning. The eagle comes, chomps on his liver, and at night it grows out again. Now, if all of us here decided to do something, to go mountain climbing, I've never climbed a mountain in my life, but I suspect some of you here have done so. Right. Right? Right. Imagine if all of us went mountain climbing and Luke saw Prometheus, and he draws our attention that there's a man there seemingly in trouble, and we all scamper along the mountainside to him, and we notice that he's healing. He's wounded, but he's also healing. And so we congratulate him. And we say, we don't exactly know how that is possible. That only seems to happen in fiction. But you're healing, so congratulations. If we said that to Prometheus, not knowing he was Prometheus, he would spit in our faces. Because in that moment, he would be unable, after years, centuries, thousands of years, tied to a rock, he would be critically unable to distinguish between the trauma and the healing. Does that make sense? Right? Because the trauma, the wounding, the opening would be a resourcing for the healing. And his healing would be a resourcing for the wounding, right? Prometheus would prefer to die than to stay on that rock. He would prefer, because dying would be a release, right? So in these days, as a psychologist and as a politician of a different order, of a fugitive order, I no longer refer to trauma as if it's separate from healing. In fact, I no longer refer to suffering and oppression as if it's separate from justice. Because even justice kneels on our necks these days. Right? Even justice seems to be reinforcing that carceral dynamic. It might give us a seat at a table. We're always wanting a seat at a table, minorities. Right? It might give us a seat at a table, but it will never lead us outside the house. It will never show us a place outside the house, even when we want to play outside. We're trapped in here, is what I'm trying to say. I want to deepen your idea and your sense that we're closed in, and that it is often the case when we try to address the system in the ways that we're often coached to. Speak truth to power, burn down the system, but on Tuesdays and Thursdays, down with capitalism. Buy your t-shirt. Buy your Down with Capitalism t-shirts. Every attempt, it seems, to address our critical moments, the dying of white stability, only seems to reinforce white stability. I had a brother from Hopland, California. He said, Bayo, you got to hear this. He said, I have a plan to get people to get off Facebook. Okay? Hear me out. To get off Facebook, because Facebook is killing people. They're always on their screens, and it's hurting our children and families. It's a worthy goal. I'm going to get people to get off Facebook. And I said, brother, that is a solid idea. Tell me how you're going to do that. He said, I'm going to get them to go to their gardens and do permaculture. We're going to do permaculture together. I'm going to inspire people to do permaculture. We need more permaculture. Permaculture. And I was like, great. All right, tell me, what's next? What do I need to do? Tell me how what's your next plan? He said, okay, I started a Facebook group. And he went down the story path enthusiastically, never for once realizing that sometimes, the very resources we deploy to address our oppression could reinforce that oppression. What am I trying to do here? I'm trying to say that it's often the case that our response to death and suffering repeats the conditions and reinforces those conditions of death and suffering. So we need a way through. We need a third path. We need a different posture. Maybe not the posture of the agential, independent activist, right? I think these times the trickster is composting the activist as well. Like the activist and the notions of independent agency is being composted, right? Is being challenged by the very, very results we're seeing out in the world. We need a crack. We need a minor gesture. What's a minor gesture? A minor gesture is the alterity within. By alterity, I mean the strange otherness within. Think about the trickster aboard the ship, right? The trickster didn't attempt to close down the enterprise. Instead, the trickster snuck onto the slave ship. And the histories of slave technologies in the Caribbean and in the United States are lessons for us all right now, Scotland inclusive. Because underneath the noses of their masters, they snuck in their gods and their goddesses and their ancient spirits, right? Do you know the story of how Santeria or Candomblé or those religious systems emerged? There were attempts because the colonial masters, the plantation leaders, would try to enforce their own gods upon the slaves. And the slaves were like, well, what we can do is to pretend to be worshiping their God, but just say their God out loud when we know we're actually worshiping our own gods. So they had these fugitive hidden agreements, and they told themselves that the only way to live under the noses of mastery was to hide. And this is why those Negro spiritual songs, Wade in the Water, emerged. The idea of wading in the water is an invitation to consider hiding as courageous, right? Hiding not as a withering fear, but hiding as an act of dominance, where dominance is not colonial, it's relational. It's how we say, what's this again? Declare yourself welcome. It's how we say, we will build here, we will plant here, we will field new powers, because we cannot depend on this other notion of power. We will find power with our relationship with ecology, with trees, with each other. We would experiment at the edges of death because the colonial human is dying. This is the minor gesture. The minor gesture is not spectacular. It's not premised on huge transformational events. It doesn't look like Obama. Okay? The minor gesture is a turning. It is, in one way, you could put it this way. How Audre Lorde says, you know this quote? The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. I like that. But then Karen Barad, a friend of mine and a feminist icon and a physicist, responds by saying, yes, that is true, but the master's tools never stay faithful to the master for too long. Even those tools are emergent and fugitive. They become something else. This is what I mean by fugitivity. I have a theory called ontofugitivity. In other words, ontological fugitivity, the way that the world slips away from capture. It slips away from ownership. It slips away from identity. This idea that things spill and slip away is the premise of freedom and new kinds of freedoms. I want to end with this story and this invitation. My son is autistic, 6 years old now. I'm autistic too, but he's, you could say, more on the clinical scale, more autistic than I am. And I've told this story many times. It feels right to share it here again. I have been coached neurotypically into masking my autism. What this means is that um, I I know how to pass as something else. And it's not unique to me. All of us are trained in neurotypicality. Neurotypicality is not a type of person, neither is autism. Neurotypicality is a tendency to repeat dominant, predetermined values. It's the whispering voice in our ears that tells us this is how to succeed. This is how to self regulate in public. When you shake a hand, pump it twice to portray confidence. You know, this is how to move up through the ranks. This is how to pass as someone respectable. We are always getting those voices in our ears. Sit like this. It's the protocol of good behavior. It's how we regulate and how we're regulated by people staring at us, telling us you're doing bad now, regulate yourself. This is neurotypicality. We're policing each other. That's what neurotypicality is. So I was well coached in that. Through schools, family, we get some of that training. And so when my son came, he came like a prophet, tearing through the ranks of my neurotypicality and challenging me. He's my greatest teacher right now. He's my greatest teacher. He's a wild God passing. And that was a phrasing of my wife, because he had these moments, meltdowns, I would call it, based on my training. I hear you, brother. He had meltdowns, right? And my wife forbade that term. She said, "Don't you ever call it a meltdown. I don't care about your training. It is not a meltdown. It is not a tantrum. It is the passing of a wild God. And when a God passes, you build an altar, right? So she's the boss. I stopped using meltdowns. He had a big moment then while we were walking in a shopping mall in Chennai. Stop me if you know this story. Walking in that shopping mall, my daughter was out in front with my wife, and I was walking with Kea, my son. And he had this moment. I don't know what he was responding to, but I don't, maybe the lights, maybe the people, maybe something in the atmosphere, but he suddenly wanted to lie on the ground, and he was squirming and screaming on the ground, and I did not know what to do. Despite my politics and my training and my PhD and my everything, I just stood listless and not knowing what to do. I was probably trying to coax him out of his stupor and saying things like, "I'll give you a cookie," or "Let's just get home," or just because I was getting increasingly embarrassed, right? One, I'm a black man in India. And I'm not going to say more than that, but I'm a black man in India. And so I felt the stares of 1 billion people on my back. And I just wanted to get out of there. So I was straddling the tensions of being a father and being an immigrant, living in a country that isn't exactly hospitable to dark skin. And I wasn't doing a good job. I wasn't being there for him. My wife comes to me and says, "Walk away. I'll handle this." And I walk away with my tail between my legs. And then she does something that has inspired me ever since. She gets down on her knees and lies on the ground next to him. She doesn't give him hope. She doesn't say a word. She doesn't wax poetic. She doesn't go eloquent. She doesn't speak to him at all. She just rests her body next to my son in radical accompaniment, like one trickster did by entering the slave ship, just traveling with him through the cracks. She doesn't heal him. She doesn't try to recover him or to grab him or asphyxiate him with her care. She just stays by him. And two of them, for a brief moment in time, caught the shape of an anti-capitalist metaphor in the very heart of a giant shopping complex, almost like a critique of the very enterprise and in the very middle of the foyer. And people pass by and walk. And I just look from afar and notice that this is the politics that I've been gesturing at for so long. And after a while, the god passes and she gets up with him. This is what I call a prior generosity. White modernity is the orthodoxy of the obvious. It's made of a matrix of dots. It wants us to believe that we are alone and that we're isolated and that we're dissociated, that our bodies are only indebted to what we do and what we bring to the table, or maybe even a welfare state, or notions of freedom passed by nationalistic principles and ideologies. That's white modernity. What it doesn't know how to account for are the tentacles that are constantly proceeding from our bodies, that we're not as well put together as we think. We're not all that. We're spread out, we're virtual, we're diasporic, and we're monstrous. And by monstrous, I don't mean pathological. I don't mean it in the Lovecraftian notion of the monster. I mean the monster as the crossroads. You're not a highway, you're a crossroads. You're the interdependence of ecologies that are too eloquent for language to word or phrase. You are microbial, you're a virus, you're spiritual, you're architectural, you're threshold intensity, and you're a becoming. And you're too manifold to be squeezed into being. You're a becoming. And this is what white modernity is scandalized by. This is what it wants to police. And this is the reason why we are here. This is the reason why this fascinating place is a minor gesture, right? Right, I hear that it might be connected with ships, and those ships that were built, and some of those ships may have been slave ships, right in the heart of that enterprise becomes this beautiful project, not trying to include people into the system, but to experiment at the edges of inclusion. Because that's what we need today. Even inclusion is violent, right? Because it's like, it presumes that there's a baseline reality to get back into, right? But our suffering, our falling apart needs a different materiality of care. We need to fall apart, yes, but we need to fall apart together. And this falling apart is our social experiment. Maybe the task here isn't to create, some utopia. Maybe it's just enough to touch each other and know that we are radically accompanying each other together. 42,000 years ago, there was a cataclysmic event, solar radiation, and there was a polar shift, I hear. It's called the Adams Transitionary Geomagnetic Event, I think. It's a long title for something that happened 42,000 years ago. It's 42,000 years ago. It's named after Adams, Douglas Adams, who wrote the book Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And he said something about, spoiler alert again, he said something about 42 being so these brilliant New Zealand scientists thought they would name it after Douglas Adams. So it's called the Adams Transitionary Geomagnetic Event, something like that. Something happened to the world. The surface was rendered, untenable for life. So proto-human populations went underground. And this is how cave art was proliferated. Cave art? Just hands on walls in caves all over the world, right? This correlates with the time when there was a huge event and crisis, and we all went underground to live, to make art. I think a descending is needed now because we're suffering a similar crisis. All our solutions aren't working, and I'm even more surprised and shocked and worried if they work, right? If they actually work, I would be worried, right? So we seem to be in a time when we need to descend into the earth to plant our hands on walls. That won't be a solution, but it will be a cultivating of new kinds of responsibilities that meet the intensity of this moment. So I want to end here by reminding us how Prometheus' story ends. This prior generosity I'm talking about is the story of abundance and a stranger sort of generosity that outwits and supersedes and exceeds the poverty of individuation that has been central to the project of white modernity. What saves Prometheus, if you remember the story? How did you know? Yes, Hercules saves Prometheus. He comes and he kills the bird and he saves Prometheus. Why that is interesting to me is that Hercules in the literature, in lots of literature around international scholarship, is thought as the figure of autism, right? Hercules as the embodiment of divinity and mortality in an uneasy combination. So Hercules is often thought of as, as a champion of autism. And I like that autism released us from whiteness. Maybe autism is about losing our way. Maybe autism is about losing ourselves from the shackles of neurotypicality, or at least composting that cartography well enough to sprout other kinds of agency. And I think that's happening in the ways we're cooking together and eating together and planting together and not knowing together and celebrating the uncertainty of this time together. That's health. Maybe not health that a doctor might approve of or a psychotherapist might celebrate, but it's a drunken type of radical accompaniment that invites new materialities of care. And that's the prior generosity that I need. Thank you. Thank you. All right already. Thank you very much. I hear that there's going to be room for maybe conversation, questions or something. May I sit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, thank you doesn't cut it. So feeling immense gratitude for all you've shared. I realized I forgot my pencil, so I had to borrow the pen from Sarah next to me. There was so much there, and so really grateful, and as I'm sure we all are. And so in the spirit of a gathering, we wanted to kind of like invite people to respond to what you've said, what's moved in them. That might be in the form of a poem or words, reflections, or music, whatever way you feel called to respond, and we'll kind of explore some of the themes you've set running in this space together before we eat. I will kind of like fess up and say we did kind of like prime a couple of people. You know who you are. But yeah, this is really an open invitation, and Bayo as well, if there's anything further you feel to feed in. So anyone feel, and maybe if people, you can either come here and use the microphone, or you can stand up from your seat, whichever feels most comfortable. But if you are standing up from your seat, try and speak up so the people at the back can hear, but also so that it picks up for the recording. Offer some money, that worked, yeah. 10,000?
It always works.
I wanted to also apologize for mislabeling you as the trickster.
No.
And
It's fine.
as you were speaking, it occurred to me we have a much better label, which is or role. I'm not sure what the right word is, but when we were playing with the idea of the governed free state, we talked about needing poeticians. So I think poeticians. So I think you fill that. You fill those boots. Absolutely.
Creole. Say that. Creole?
Creole.
Yes. That's also true.
There you are.
I'm taking all of this, putting it on my CV.
Do I have to name names, or I don't know, because I know I did say to people, if you don't feel like you, yeah, Alison. Yeah, excuse the canine trip hazard.
Thank you. My name's Alison. My grandparents were butchers, and my grandparents were the people who received the first folk who came over from India to work in the cotton mills. And my grandfather was really worried about the people who sat in his office, because he was a personnel officer for British Northrop that made looms that spun thread and wool for making garments. And he was really concerned about the fact that these people had come and no one was offering them a good Sunday lunch after church on a Sunday, because that was my grandfather. And so everybody who came through his office, him being the first person that they'd met, got invited to Sunday lunch. And so I grew up with this extraordinary stamp collection from around the world, from people who had written to my grandfather as the person who'd offered this prior generosity that led to story after story after story. And when my grandfather died, the streets of Blackburn were lined with people who looked nothing like my grandfather and who were dressed in the cloth of the context that they had come from, and who stood and paid their respects as he travelled. And you have travelled, and I'm a little bit concerned as a grandmother that you don't have a scarf, and it's Baltic in here. So the first thing I want to do is give you a scarf, and this is the first scarf I knitted after I'd become a foster mother and begun that work of radical hospitality that is fostering. And at the time, my daughter was shredding her hands as this kind of pain inside her escaped. And I started doing the same, and I still do. I went to my doctor, and she just said, look, I could give you beta blockers, or you could take up knitting. So Bayo, declare yourself welcome. But most of all, please, wear a scarf.
Just want to say something. I feel like I've been knighted. Is this a... that's the story. Let's just say this so that I have something impressive to tell my family when I get back home, okay? Thank you so much.
You have been knitted.
You win the day.
So, and then Jihan asked me to just prepare a little bit to respond to, so I didn't. But I've kind of been looking through a stock of some of the poetry, but also some of the things that have warmed us. And I know I'm here with a number of people. I've actually brought a fire pit. You may not know it and you may not see it, but there's a fire pit of people in the audience who are all here, who have been gratefully following your work and reading your work and listening to your voice for several years now, and we're delighted to be able to come. But Bayo, you spoke to us of cracks. And so I want to read my first humble, stumbling poem that was written about cracks, and written in what was a Christian, post-Christian, pagan journey, and which was written with my hands in the earth, and just after I'd lost a child. It's called In the Cracks. It's in the cracks that the wild things grow. Bugle purpling over stone, ox eyes looking fearlessly into the sun for the light that will one day wither their sight, and droplets of gold vetch stretch. She was right first time. You are the gardener after all, with a love that breaks open stone and hands too freshly cracked for her to touch now. Only the desperate and doubting may press the red petalled palms and see the pollen stain their fingertips. And then the other poem I want to share is one for today, in some traditions of the world. And it's about a guy who was traveling to occupied Palestine from a city in East Libya. And it's quite a well-known story. The story tells us he was from a city some distance away, and he was there in the crowd. And he did not say, I cannot carry this. And he did not say, I do not want the scalps in my skin. And he did not say, I do not have the strength. And he did not say, I don't want to do this. And he did not say, I will not travel with you. And he did not say, I am afraid. And he did not say that the wood was sticky with your blood. And he did not say, I despise you. And he did not say, I do not want your shame upon my back. And he did not say he would not dig deep to find the strength. And he did not say his own suffering was great too. And he did not point first to his own burden. And he did not say that this was far too messy. And he did not say he was too good for the task. And he did not argue, and he did not ask why. And he did not say, I don't want your suffering near me. And he did not say his kind did not help your kind. And he did not say that you should say sorry. And he did not say that you should be more careful. And he did not judge. And he didn't hide his name. His name was Simon, meaning hearkening, meaning listening. And he was there, and he walked the way with you, and he carried it for a while, and he was there. And that is the story, and that is all. And for me, that's a story of radical accompaniment, and one we don't know and don't understand, but it's handed down in a story that may be somewhere underneath all that has been done with whiteness to those traditions that are sacred and honoring that some of us have grown with. Maybe there's something there that we can recuperate and grow into again. And then finally, you spoke of minor gestures. And at this moment in time, we all know we are living in, through, with, and experiencing genocidal actions against our brothers and sisters. And we are rendered extraordinarily helpless. And I think you've really shown how to move out of that helplessness with minor gestures. Those gestures of radical accompaniment, those determinations to stay in the cracks, the messy places, the jagged places we don't understand. And for the last 15 years, I've been working with colleagues and friends in the Gaza Strip every day for the last 15 years. Myself and many of the fire pit here, we've probably lost well over 200 people since the 9th of October. So we're learning to live with and hold a grief and expand our holding of that grief. And that is also why we're here, to listen to your words and your wisdom from the brotherly work that you do in holding grief and showing ways in which grief can be held and joy can still be found, and that there can be minor gestures. And so our minor gestures are through eSIMs and smartphones, and every morning and every evening, my friends in Gaza write to me. And for the time before Christmas, their writings were of horror, of activism, of requirements, of statements, of a demand that we ask the UN and our politicians and everyone to change. And then something changed, and the minor gesture became what you have spoken of. It became a working in medicinal spaces of fugitivity. It became a way of speaking in a language of spirit, of onto-fugitivity. It became a way of saying, we do not even belong to this genocide that is all-encompassing. And so every morning and every evening we write words to one another that are words of the earth, words of the sunset and the sunrise, which will outlast this moment. And so I want to finish with the prayer to me that comes every day in that wide sense of prayer or incantation from the Gaza Strip every morning and every evening. And for you to take this in your heart with our gratitude and for your work. Salam, salam, salam. Peace, peace, peace. And good morning to the refreshing breeze of the spring dawn. Salam, salam, salam to you, my sister, sending the sunshine from the north to the warmth of my heart with its promise of freedom to come. You spoke of monsters at the crossroads. You spoke of the virus of microbial possibility. And in this virus of greetings of peace, I think I see now what you mean by minor gestures, for which we are deeply grateful. Thank you, Bayo.
Thank you, Alison. I think that was deeply moving. And I'm aware that there are other people in the space that might feel able to bring other perspectives and work more with the themes that Bayo kind of has brought into the space. If you feel able, then perhaps we might, yes.
It's just a recognition in myself that there's so many things I could say, but silence also feels like a response, and like I'm not sitting here with nothing to say or at all. But part of that work is also to just sit in silence, fully inhabiting the crack and the composting, and I'm also discovering that I'm autistic, and like I just need that space to kind of absorb everything, and that I wish there was like silence cabins all around this dream city, like there ought to be a lot more spaces to just sit and be silent, because we're bombarded by grand narratives and quite violent sounds all the time, and I just feel it in my whole body, and so I wanted to claim the silence that I'm sitting here with by explaining it, but like it's a thing. Yeah, it's a thing. So thank you. Yeah.
Hi. Okay, so just politically, I'm thinking about the kid that gets visited, and I'm thinking about the various forms of like kind, effective kind of solidarity that comes with a shared emotional body. Yeah, and then I'm thinking about the mirroring of the child and Prometheus, and I'm thinking about Hercules as a violent figure, and I'm thinking about monstrosity, and I'm thinking about how our solidarity, while being emotionally in tune with our interconnectedness, doesn't find that spiritual home as a place for meek responses to violent actions. Thank you.
I'm writing a book now. The book is called An Ocean of Milk, and it's about milk. But it's also about solidarity. It's about the very strange premise that, a strange premise it has, and the idea is it could be the case that solidarity could be a form of biopolitical control. That the ways we express solidarity could be amenable to surveillance tactics, or to the extension of the nation state, or to the deepening of white modernity. A very powerful example of solidarity gone wrong, if you will, is the international effort in 2004 to support and save the people in Asia who were victims of the tsunami. Remember 2004 and the tsunami, right? I'm sure you remember where you were when it happened. Well, billions of dollars rushed into those islands and into Asia to support the people there. Psychologists traveled down to help the people heal from the trauma of the tsunami. The thing is, with that billion-dollar effort came packaged foods, McDonald's, right, and giant corporations, so that the people are now bemoaning and regretting the solidarity that came to support them. It also happened that the therapies that came, the psychotherapists and clinical workers that came, supported the tourists, not the locals. They were more attentive to the tourists, because even trauma is a political arrangement, right? So solidarity, even our attempts to heal or to address, can often become a violent resuscitation of the very conditions we're trying to address. And so what I'm trying to say here is, and in that book, is that we need sensuous solidarities. If the frontality of how we address change is part of the carceral dynamics that we seek to change, then we need to walk sideways a bit. We need to, my son has a way of looking, I talk about this all the time. He doesn't look directly into people's eyes. He looks from the side, right? He avoids the gaze. He's not available for visual captivity, you might say. So he looks from his side. I call it looking away at, right? Which is a grammatical monstrosity, because you can only look at or look away from. You don't look away at. And yet it seems to be what he's doing, because he enters into a space and he's immediately aware of the space's textures in ways that I'm not able to access it. Looking away at. It's the peripherality of the sides. There's some sensuousness that is beckoning. That is what my dear sister has put into poetry, the minor gesture. Maybe there are other kinds of solidarities. Maybe there are other ways of addressing these moments that doesn't look like a grand narrative, that isn't a response to the inundating flows of the news, but is an invitation for us to shape shift, right? So yes to all those things you're thinking about, and yes to what I call crustacean complexity. It's crustacean because crabs walk sideways. I just like making shit up. But there's a sideways sensuosity that is invited now, that is a breaking down of the citizen subject. The citizen subject is the crisis. all the subsidizations, all the luxuries of the citizen subject is what white modernity is burdened with maintaining. Now it can no longer maintain that. It can no longer hold aloft the paradigm of identity. And that's why we need to be composted. We need to fall apart, but we need to fall apart together. Okay. That's it.
Thank you. And I'm wondering if there's anybody else who, and I really appreciate your request for silence. And I had meant to ask us to kind of sit with the words, and in my rushing, I overlooked that. And I'm wondering if there's anybody else who wants to bring some words in or some responses. Please come forward if you're able to come forward. If not, then you're welcome to speak from where you are and just speak loudly. I don't know if I can speak loudly. Okay.
So I also, I live with a daughter who escapes maybe not visual incarceration, but definitely physical incarceration. And she's visited by wild gods, and it's a delight. It's a delight. And yeah, you'll get to meet her on Sunday, so that'll be a pleasure for you. And I wrote this poem when we were navigating some systems that were doing their best to keep her still. So I'd like to read it. If the point is joy, and I'm going to shake lots and possibly cry, okay? If the point, I'm also going to mess with my text. If the point is joy, then I'm not worried. If the point is to fit this multi-dimensional peg into that square hole, I am worried. Not because of your capacities, your desires, your inclination, but because of ours. If the point is to be in the world, fully, emphatically in the world, then I am not worried. Not worried at all. But if the point is to adjust, to fit yourself contorted and constrained into our small, clean world, then I am worried. Not because you are not welcome, but because you deserve a spaciousness, a vividness, a world yet to be built. If the point is to live like we are energy, then I am not worried. If the point is to sit still, would you just sit still? Then I am worried. Not because you are life in motion, my dear, but because here we are, stuck still. If the point is a connection, a mutual loving, holding of each other, then I am not worried. But if the point is self-sufficiency, doing it by yourself, so low, then I am worried. Not because I do not wish you freedom, I do. Oh, darling, I do. But because my freedom from your needs is no freedom at all. If the point is freedom, you are a door ajar to the world we are seeking. Please hold it open for us all. If the point is love, then here we are. We're right where we need to be. Thank you.
Nothing to say.
Wow. Thank you, Nikki. Some really moving sharing. So I really appreciate people sort of stepping into that space. I know it's you know, it's walking between the kind of need for quiet and need the letting those emotions kind of settle in us, and being in a space where we can express anything, and being kind of the sense of needing to kind of like yank yourself into the next expression or articulation, and it's pretty challenging. I am gonna ask if anybody else wants to, and I wonder if we just I feel quite full and empty, and I'm aware there's some food that's been made, so perhaps I'm gonna ask in case anybody feels they particularly have something.
I was just this is my first time hearing your words, and actually I'm really grateful to be part of certain human ecology, to have the reach out, and in this moment I just felt like the right thing. And even today, I was feeling tired, and I wasn't sure how I could take it in, or to comprehend what I was aware was gonna be some quite big topics. Like the description written out was like, oh, okay, we're gonna go in here. And what I thought was just quite beautiful is the way that you are aware of the necessity for lightness in these things. And what I thought was quite funny was the fact that you found a spiritual connection in Scotland, and one of the first things that you said was like, I'm all about the crack. And I was like, does he mean the crack, like the jacks? He's got a lot of it. And then you went in the depth, but it brought this really nice light sense to the whole conversation for me. And I think easing in on that level, so often these things come from such a deep place that there's a feeling that they have to be heavy. And I like the sidestep that you offered in your words, and I appreciate that. And that's what I will take away from this. Thank you.
Did you notice that saying what crack means in Scotland? Maybe you can explain what.
Okay. So the crack in Scotland, well, I mean, like, if you've got like somebody's like, oh, how is that hanging out with them? Like, oh, he's got a good crack. He's got a good crack. And it's spelled C-R-A-I-C, and it means they got good chat. Or you could have good crack with somebody. So you could have good chat, which means you might have like, you know, a good banter is the other. You know, the word banter, yeah.
Right.
So you've got very good cracks there. Maybe that makes a bit more sense. If you can stand up and just have a chat with somebody, you can walk into a room, feel comfortable, and just have good crack with someone, you can have good crack. You could say, how's the crack? Which means like, how are you? It's like, how's the crack? Oh, it's good crack. So I mean, I can look all the way today and I can comfortably say, how was the chat? It's good crack, guys. I speak all those things. And that has a feeling of warmth and communality,
Right.
and togetherness all in one word, which I think is a beautiful thing about Scotland. So
I think I'm moving to this country.
Yeah.
Please do. So I have somebody.
Sorry. Thank you. Please, would you speak the name of your wife and daughter?
My daughter's name is Alethea, Anya, and my wife's name is EJ. EJ, short for Ijeoma. Her father was a Nigerian. Her mother was Iranian, Indian, English. So between her and me, our children are confused. But EJ is my wife's name, and my daughter's name is Alethea, and my son's name is Kea. Thank you for asking me to do that. Yeah.
Hi, Bayo. I always find it beautiful that you say in your offerings, please stop me if you've heard this story. I never want you to ever stop telling your stories, and I have heard the two stories that you brought tonight. Many times I've heard you say them. The issue on the slave ship and your experience with Kia and your wife in the shopping mall with the visitation of the wild god. And yeah, I would, and you said it again this evening, but I am just so glad you're here in Scotland sharing those words with your body here in this land, in this space. I think we're all really lucky. Well, I feel lucky, and I'm sure most of the other people here do as well. So yeah, welcome to Scotland, and thank you always for your beautiful stories. Never stop telling them. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to honor the beauty of your language, because I mean it feels deeply ecological in the sense that there's all, I mean, what was it, crustacean, what was it? Oh, I'm just keeping that like, oh my goodness. But yes, the writer Kerry Doherty introduced me to the sort of the equal and opposite force of trauma as the glimmer, and your language feels like the glimmer. It feels like when all of this cacophonous kind of jangly stuff is coursing through my body, it feels like when you speak it, even though it's hefty, but it feels like you're coming to lie down beside me on the floor of a shopping mall. And so even though I'm exhausted and I've just driven 2 hours and I'll drive 2 hours back, you know, it's like it's nourishing. And this, yeah, I just wanted to ask you actually about the way you use language, because there's lots of amazing thinkers, but there's something very particular about your language that has a creaturehood. And I'm curious about where it comes from and how you arrived at that kind of voice that's so distinctly yours. If I'm allowed to ask a question, yeah.
I'll just sit down for this one. My first response, sister, is anything I could say about this would be potentially a lie. I mean, I could say that my culture is very poetic. The Yoruba people are very poetic. They're very festive and carnivalesque in the ways they see the world. The griot, the storyteller. You know, there's something about the culture that proliferates eloquence. But that's not all there is to it. I mean, there are many parts of it that are about the unspeakable as well. I would just say, for the sake of conversation, that I find myself drawn to the ineffable, to mystery. That even though I'm trained as a scientist, I've always been magnetized by the unspeakable, the unsaid, right? There's this movie called Contact with Jodie Foster. When she looks out the window of a multi-dimensional spatial space-time vehicle, space-time travel vehicle, she says something as she beholds some cosmic thing happening. And the director wisely does not show the audience what's happening. Right, we just see it on her face. Her face is changing as she looks at something so utterly beautiful. And she says they should have sent a poet. They should have sent a poet. She says it 3 times, I think. I like the idea of language as poetry, and poetry as speaking in times of crisis. Like the language of crisis is poetry. You want to slip away from the fixity of words. You want words to behave like an animal. You want them to sprout limbs and crawl on the earth. You don't want them to be so austere and eminent and elitist in their meaning. You want them to scurry along like critters. And I find myself drawn to that over and over again. Maybe it's a gift, maybe it's a curse, maybe it's culture, maybe it's my mother slapping me upside the head. Whatever it is, it's a constellation and it's a gift for a moment. one day I may not be able to speak in this way, but for now, I will continue to do so. Does this make sense?
Thank you. And I mean, I think we maybe transition now, because maybe it's the kind of in the spirit of incompleteness. Yes. We will move from how we're currently assembled, and we will maybe get some food, maybe continue some of these conversations, maybe get warmer. I don't know. How can words really express our gratitude? We're so grateful so far. So, but let's get you something to eat maybe before you need to take your train.
Thank you all.